thank you, first of all, everybody that is here live. It's so nice that you're taking the time this evening or this afternoon or this morning, maybe wherever you are in the world, to come and share this moment and like expand our horizons of what it means to think existentially, to think about existence. It's so nice to have everyone together, and thank you to everybody who takes the time in the future to watch the recording of this. It is an absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Chris Earl. He will be speaking about things that, until our conversation recently, where we were introduced to each other, I had absolutely no idea of. And I think this is what is so exciting about projects like this, is that we are not just sticking to the existential ideas that are in your probably more traditional textbooks, but we are able to say, okay, well, how else can we explore these ideas? And this is what I'm so excited that Chris is going to bring for us today, is for me at least, a very different discipline. And I'm not going to be explaining what it means to be a molecular biologist, but I'm sure Chris might later. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction, and then I'll let Chris add anything that I might have missed. So, Dr. Chris Earl is a postdoctoral research scientist. He manages a science communication platform called MolBio, all capitals, which stands for the meaning of life and molecular biology. His goal is to make the findings of molecular biology accessible to our broader society. Chris is interested in the ways that modern scientific investigations into the nature of life and our place in the universe inform our sense of meaning and purpose, particularly within the framework of existential and absurdist philosophy. Now, I spoke with Chris briefly on email about how we might start the session, and he invited me to. I'd said, I've thought so much about our conversation since we spoke, and it's already started to influence the way that I'm understanding my clients and thinking about the world, myself already. And he said, would you like to start by sharing with the audience some of the ways that it's inspired you? And so I'm not necessarily going to be doing justice at all to anything concrete that you were speaking about, Chris, but I'm happy to share a little bit of that for both for you and for anybody interested. And one of the things that we were speaking about was this idea of the universe. And I think we might, you might be mentioning it in our presentation today. And I started to think about this in terms of my client work, and thinking about this idea of something being at the center of our universe. We sometimes have that as a phrase, someone's at the center of my universe. And this idea of, and this is, I don't think this is the science of it, but my understanding, or like my interpretations of this, was the fact that when something's at the center of our universe, everything kind of unfolds from that. I think it's pretty much a debunked theory, maybe. I'm sure Chris might correct the science of it, but just that idea of thinking about the universe, thinking about what's at the center of our universe. And I was thinking, what are my clients placing at the center of their universe? How, if their trauma, if their issues are at the center of their universe, and everything in their experience is unfolding from that, then how can that be a helpful metaphor for them to consider? Can I have more choice about what I'm centering at the big at in my universe? And if I can realize that, using that as a metaphor, how can I have more agency about what I'm choosing to shift, or can I shift what's at the center of my universe? Anyway, so I brought this as a metaphor especially for some of my more visual clients, and sure enough, they found it really, really interesting to think about it in that metaphorical way, in that visual way, about, what are we placing? What am I placing at the center? What if everything of my understanding of the world unfolding? And they found it really useful. So, Chris, I really thank you about for that. I know that it's not the science of it, but my point being is that just having conversations with people that are working and thinking from different places, speaking about things in different ways than the kind of language and the ways of understanding that we're maybe most familiar with. It can be, really, really inspiring in all sorts of different ways. But that's my little tidbit for you, Chris. I really, really won't take up many more of our time by wittering on to all of the different things that we spoke about and not doing it justice.
No, thank
Instead, what
you.
I'll do is,
Thank
yeah,
you very
hand
much,
it over to
Natalie.
you and thank you so much for being
I just
here.
wanted to, while I remember, just to say that as I talk about existential philosophy, one of the issues that I'll be kind of discussing is where people in existential philosophy have kind of placed the focus in terms of thinking about the meaning behind our existence, which when we talk about a meaningless universe or a void, where are they actually looking and are they looking in the right place? I'm going to argue that they probably aren't. So I think it's relevant from a client perspective, but also, thinking very broad in terms of ourselves as existential philosophers, scientists. Cool. So shall I share my screen then?
Yeah.
And thank you for the introduction, Natalie. That was lovely. Excellent. Right. Probably need to explain why on earth I've come to this community, because for many people it will seem like an unusual place to have turned up, but hopefully you'll understand why as I explain what I've been doing. So I run this science communication platform called MolBio, and it stands for the meaning of life and molecular biologists. And it's not likely to just be philosophers saying, what does molecular biology have to do with the meaning of life, or psychotherapists, but probably also a lot of molecular biologists too. So I do actually feel I need to convince everybody here of the value of this, but I don't think that will be in any doubt by the end. So it's a content warning here to keep yourself safe. We're going to talk about themes of nihilism, the lack of meaning and purpose. Now, I'm not delivering here a nihilistic framework. I think this is a positive framework for thinking about our existence and the cosmos as a whole. But sometimes, depending on what the connotations of those things are for yourself, you're going to respond differently. So maybe it's not the right time for you, but just keep that in mind. Okay, so who am I? I'm Chris Earl, as Natalie said. I'm a molecular biologist working in research. What I'm talking about today is completely independent from my research role. I've started to write on the topics of the philosophy of science, the history of science, and what you would maybe term theoretical science as well. And that platform is called MolBio. It's on a lot of different places. As I start out, I'm trying to engage with a lot of different audiences, and at this time, it's very hard to get people's attention and find those people who are interested in this stuff. And so I'm on all of the platforms at the moment, Blue Sky and everything, and I'll show you that later. My partner, she trained as a pluralistic counselor. So that's the big reason why I've ended up here. I wouldn't have even known to explore this field if it wasn't for her training and the stuff that I was exposed to through her work. And my intent here is to show that molecular biology matters to you as an existential philosopher, as an existential therapist, but more importantly, many people here will be none of those things. And I think it matters to everyone. And it's about the experience of being a human being. And actually, I think that scientific work has not always been communicated in a way that is helpful to meaning and purpose, but I believe that it can be. And this was a big book that was important for me, which is from Mick Cooper. It's one that the therapists may be familiar with. And so Mick Cooper's book about existential psychotherapy introduced me to a lot of the philosophers that I talk about here, but also the concept of pluralism. It's another reason why I'm here, because many people would think you would be here because you're already an existential therapist. Now, I believe sometimes the greatest insights come from jumping across fields. I've had incredible insights from existential therapy and philosophy, and vice versa. I think there's incredible insights the other way too. Now, science communication has often been delivered in a very condescending, arrogant, and at times unpleasant tone. So I do think that science communicators could really benefit from concepts like Carol Rogers' unconditional positive regard. It's one I've always loved, this idea of just holding other people in unconditional positive regard. And I think it's fair to say we can imagine many science communicators that haven't done that. But I want to convey that sentiment in the talk today. Another key text for me was from the philosopher Todd May in his book, A Significant Life, Human Meaning in a Silent Universe. And he talks about Albert Camus and his concept of the absurd. But to be fair to Albert Camus, Todd May is a lot clearer about what's being said. He's really cuts away some of the ambiguity to really deliver a very clear message. And most of the power, I think, of what Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, where he introduced his version of the absurd, because it was a concept in existential philosophy before then, was to make that bold statement that this is a meaningless universe. And that's the difference. People had pondered whether that was the case, might that be the case, within the framework of the changing relationship with society and religion. However, I think by being bold and putting that out there, that really opened up quite the level of self-reflection and exploration about the nature of existence. Now, Todd May's book actually spends a lot of time talking about how, in the absence of, for him, an absence of a grand narrative, as someone who is atheistic, not religious, although this isn't exclusively, this talk isn't just about that. People find space for all manner of different narratives to make meaning in their lives. But he talks about narrative values. And all I can do is point you to that book to look into that. We'd do another talk about the ways we construct meaning. I'm not going to talk about that today. Okay, so this is a quote from Todd May. So what am I actually talking about? Okay, so Todd May describes it very nicely. The absurd itself is something very precise. It is the confrontation of our need for meaning with the unwillingness of the universe to yield it to us. Humans need reasons. We need to know that there is some point to going on. The universe, however, is silent. It does not speak, or if it does, it is in a language we do not understand. So, the outline of my intent for today's talk is to introduce an extended way to think about the absurd, or this confrontation with an apparently meaningless universe. I'll have to explain what molecular biology is, and I'll have to explain what molecular biology has to say about existential philosophy, and vice versa. What does existential philosophy tell the scientist? And all of that is relevant to every human being alive. It's not a niche thing. This is about the human experience. This is about how everybody feels day to day about their lives and their place in the universe. So we're going to start with that classical family game. And I know that as people meet up over the holidays that will be coming up, everyone will be reaching for that classic existentialist or molecular biologist, the board game. So let's just get started with it. Okay, so the question is very simple. You all know the rules. Is it an existentialist or is it a molecular biologist? And Natalie, if people are coming in the chat with suggestions, you can give me a sense if there's like a common, a more frequent, more votes for one or the other. But if it's not clear, that's fine as well. So question one, this is a quote. The quote is, "This book declares that even within the limits of nihilism, it is possible to find the means to proceed beyond nihilism. I have attempted to pursue this direction, a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert. I mean, also, if someone in the chat is claiming to know the specific origins of the quote, which would be very impressive, we'll have to, that would be amazing too. But that may be too high a difficulty level. Shall I look at what are we seeing, Natalie? I think we've got one in the chat.
Nas thinks it's an existential philosopher. Katie thinks it's a philosopher.
Well done to Nas and Katie.
Danielle, yeah. Andrea Wilson doesn't know, but it loves this.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a beautifully written one. And it's Albert Camus himself from the preface written in 1955 for The Myth of Sisyphus, written 15 years after original publication. Okay, question 2. God is the name of the blanket we throw over mystery to give it shape. Now, I'll be honest, I know that I made pretty clear the simple rules of this game, and I may have broke the rules with this one. If someone knows the origins of this quote, which they may do, that'd be great to see.
Katie says scientist Dawkins, ? Nas says scientist. Hannah says mole biologist. Danielle says philosopher.
So I think I can totally understand why people have made those suggestions. And as I said, it is a bit of a trick, so I should apologize. So this one is from Barry Taylor, who was the road manager for the band AC/DC. He's been attributed with this kind of incredible quote, which kind of describes something in such an incredible way. But yeah, Barry Taylor, the road manager, AC/DC, apparently. Okay. I'll give you a clue that I'm actually adhering to the rules with this one. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universe's unfeeling immensity, out of which he emerged only by chance. His destiny is nowhere spelled out, nor is his duty. And I'll just wait and see what we think, if we're getting a sense.
I'd like to give your first official feedback as well. Katie says that you're a menace for question 2.
It's not right. I'm sorry. It wasn't right.
And in terms of answers for question 3, we've got scientist, philosopher, scientist, scientist.
That's interesting. I think that's a good point as well, isn't it? That, well, I think what might be coming from that is that, I mean, oh wait, that was for all 3, wasn't it?
For question 3.
Was that maybe someone giving an answer for each?
No, sorry, I wasn't reading the names.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You were reading different answers. Yeah, so this one is a scientist. It is a molecular biologist, Jacques Monod, but it's possibly the most existentially flavored of all of the quotes, I would think. I mean, it's quite incredibly put. Okay, so a bit of the history then, and why science has so much to say about existential questions. We can think of humanity decentering moments, and this is Sigmund Freud's kind of categorization of 3 major intellectual revolutions in particular, because there was so many revolutions at this time in history. In particular, he was interested in ones that changed the way we saw ourselves intrinsically and our place in the universe extrinsically. So the first big one, right at the beginning of the scientific revolution, is Nicholas Copernicus showing that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, but instead the Earth goes round the sun. And of course, if we take this to the modern day, we found that we are on one arm of a spiral Milky Way galaxy, which is one of hundreds of billions, if not more, galaxies in the universe. So but he wasn't the originator of that idea. The Greeks had made that comment, but he did evidence it in a way that was much more convincing. Although his book to introduce the idea to the public has been described as the least read book in history. Charles Darwin, with a much better selling book on the origin of species, is the co-originator of modern evolutionary theory. I think I'll throw that one out to the chat as well to see if someone knows the name of the other originator of modern evolutionary theory, given the credit for this idea at the same time as Charles Darwin, and we shouldn't forget that individual. And the point here is that Charles Darwin was saying that humans are not separate from the rest of life on Earth. And so at each point here, an illusion is being dispelled. The illusion that we stand here on Earth and we watch the sky move across our vision as the day proceeds, which very much gives the impression that we are at the center of things. It isn't unreasonable to have thought that. And then Charles Darwin here, dispelling the illusion that humans are somehow separate from animals, above them potentially. And some people would have called this the dispelling of the illusion of design in the natural world, that you would need to invoke some sort of creator to make something as complex as life. And did we get an answer, Natalie, for the co-originator of modern evolutionary theory?
No, and I think that's your point, probably.
Oh, well, yeah. So it's Alfred Russel Wallace, who was a Welsh scientist, and he went on a similar voyage to Darwin, but he went to Southeast Asia. And of course, I think this says a lot about Sigmund Freud. The third major intellectual revolution was the Freudian. And I'm not going to say much more about that. I'm not going into you might expect me here to go into consciousness and stuff like that. And I'm not going in that direction. And so Charles Darwin sketched out a very early tree of life. That was 160 years ago. And that tree of life is very different today than it was in the Victorian times. So life on Earth can actually be broken up into three major domains: bacteria, archaea, which are similar to bacteria. They're bacteria in terms of their appearance, how they look under a microscope and what the kinds of things that they do, but they're very distinct. And the third grouping, eukaryotes, and that's where you'll find animals, plants, fungi, all the kind of really common stuff that you would expect, including, of course, humans, part of the animal branch of the tree of life. We're on the ape branch of the tree of life, which caused such outrage at the time when Darwin expressed that. But what I'm telling you now is we're very much living in a microbial world. If you descend into history back in time, you will see that the origins of life, we're talking about bacterial-like cells, and that we emerge from that origin. All life is interrelated using the same molecular machinery to carry out its job. So just to put this into a timeline, I've been told that psychotherapists, for example, love timelines, so I thought I would include this. So we got the Copernican revolution right at the start of kind of the birth of modern science. And then you have this Darwinian revolution in 1859, and a very important, oft overlooked, hard to define revolution, the molecular biology revolution, which really kicks off in the 1950s, but not after some really important world events such as huge wars and the development of physics and atomic physics specifically. So yeah, the developments in physics and chemistry that happened in the early part of the 20th century allowed us access to a new level of reality, the level of atoms and molecules, the tiny level that is so small that just using light, because the wavelength of light is such that you don't get resolution at that tiny scale, we needed to wait for the discovery and application of X-rays and electron microscopy. So they allowed us to actually look at this tiny level the way that we couldn't before. And that is a science and technological advance. But what about the philosophical implications? I talked about Freud's three revolutions, how they change our understanding of what we are and our place in the universe. So how does that fit into molecular revolution? It doesn't sound very much like it would have an awful lot to say, but it does. And I think the place where most people would have heard about this in popular culture is from Carl Sagan in his, I think it was 1970s originally, television series and book, Cosmos. So this is probably the one that people have heard it put this way. The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. And it's such a beautiful framing of how atoms come into the types of atoms that make up life are forged inside the nuclear fusion reactors of stars. And then supernova, when stars explode, seed those out into the rest of the universe. And that's when what had to happen before our solar system formed, to give you these higher atomic elements like iron and things like that. So anyway, that's something that some people are aware of. Okay, so I'm aware that some of this may be unfamiliar to people, so I'm just taking a little breather to give a halftime acknowledgement. So on the left is a dog called Bonnie, who was my partner Erin's auntie's dog that we used to love looking after and really was a wonderful dog. And then on the right-hand side, our very good friends, Emily and Danielle in the Netherlands, who are here today, their beautiful dog, Billy. And I don't really need to say any more about Billy. Look at this picture. She is absolutely beautiful. So yes, I like to take a little break by looking at cute animals in the middle of the talk. So just to give ourselves a little breather before moving on. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about how this influences our concept of the absurd. And this photograph is taken in the Cairngorms National Park. And I'm standing there, and it was taken by my partner, Earl. And I'm calling this a confrontation with the absurd. And the reason for that is sometimes I feel like when you're in amongst nature and amongst mountains, I sometimes feel like it makes me really aware that I'm standing on a planet rather than when you're in a city and there's so much going on and distracting you. But sometimes when you go into the hills, it could be anywhere in the universe, or you get that feeling. Okay, so the illusion of meaning as an extension of the absurd. And I wrote an article about this, so it's hard to cover everything. But where Camus and others have really focused on the experience of confronting a universe that doesn't give an answer, a grand, all-encompassing description of why you exist. And we focus on that friction. That's the sense of absurdity, knowing that truth while trying to live as a human being in the world. But what I do in the article, as many others have, is look instead at the evolution of the desire for meaning or the need for meaning. And we can see that life, one of the really stark properties of life that's been kind of not integrated appropriately in how we discuss it as a science, is that humans and all living things, even bacterial cells, display purposeful behavior. In bacteria, that might just be moving away from something toxic and moving instead towards nutrients. But it's purposeful, it's in time, it's for an outcome. Now, if we skip away from bacteria right the way up the complexity levels to humans, then our purpose and meaning frameworks are incredibly complex, elaborate, and we have a level of consciousness and self-awareness which changes it altogether to ponder things that we're such as we are today. But ultimately, I come to the conclusion that, as some cognitive scientists have started to do, and think of humans as meaning making rather than human finding creatures. And some people might disagree with that, and I respect that. I don't think it changes too much of what I'm going to talk about today. And why is this important? It's important because we can acknowledge and appreciate the shared need for meaning in life. So I contrast this illusion of meaning with ideas of delusion. For me, what I'm saying is, as a scientist, as an atheistic philosopher, exploring meaning in existence is a similar and shared expression of the human need for meaning as someone with a belief in a God, or another type of framework for existence, such as panpsychism or pantheism, which has become more and more popular in recent years. So, yeah, academically and intellectually, we can separate those grand narrative meanings, the all-encompassing objective reality, a creator, or a religious framework that's very much about destiny or predetermined ideas about why we exist. And it's important to put that in one category and think of constructed meanings in another type of category. Not that if you are religious, you actually do still have quite a lot of challenges in terms of how you construct meaning in your existence. Religion can give you some advice, more advice potentially than without, but it's still not a foregone conclusion to know exactly what to do and how to make a meaningful life. So I feel that the underlying desire or need for emotion is shared, and it's a deeply human thing. So you could even be quite confrontational almost and say, in a sense, science could be seen as not just decentering humans emotionally and physically from the center of proceedings, but also dehumanizing, if we are to agree that the need for meaning is a deeply human thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing for us to acknowledge that. And I think it makes us better scientists to acknowledge that than to pretend that we aren't human and that we don't care about meanings and how we feel in life. And Buddhism, and actually, I think many people would now recognize that if you look at Camus' original idea of absurdity and other existentialists, there's a lot of things that resonate with concepts found in Buddhism and the concept of dukkha and suffering. So I found it quite reassuring when I read about Buddhism initially, this idea that suffering is normal, it's all encompassing, it's part of a human existence, not a problem to be fixed, but part of the human condition. But that a lot of suffering arises when our expectations of reality are in contrast to the way we'd like to think that reality is. So as you can see, this is an incredibly important framing to think about all of this stuff I'm talking about. Is that there's a problem with the way the universe is out there, or is there a problem with how we see our place in the universe and the expectations that we might have? So this is a problem for people who have been religious or believe in God, but then maybe no longer, for whatever reason, feel that they can have that, because then they once had that structure and comfort and reassurance, and then as they deconstruct their faith, that could become even more jarring. And I think it's a challenge. It's a real difficult challenge. And if the only meaning we can be 100% sure of is the meaning we construct in our everyday lives, which you might call subjective meaning, how we choose to live our lives, what we value, and who we want to be and how we want to show up for others, well, not everyone has equal opportunity for that. For example, existential philosophy, as we heard in the last session and we'll hear in the next, hasn't properly included the fact that a Black person is experiencing the literature and the research without seeing other Black existential philosophers even discussed, creating or contributing to a constant feeling of invisibility for those people. Not only that, but there's issues of ableism as well, where once your health is affected in certain ways, your capacity for joy and meaning can be greatly, greatly diminished. And unsurprisingly, an existential philosophy written by often middle class, white, Eurocentric perspectives does not devote anywhere near enough time to those facets. And just to say as well, I think a lot of scientists have wanted to say, oh, this scientific framework is beautiful to me, the magic of reality. Yeah, some days it will be. Some days it will feel like enough. In other times it is terrifying and it does feel dark. And that is related to how your experience in life is. And it's a complex thing. There's not just some answer that settles everything for you today or anytime soon, and that's it done. You will change how you feel over time. And yes, so the next session on the 27th of November talks about what is the psychosis of existential training. And the last session was really good, and I'm looking forward to that again. Okay, so to summarize, we talk of a universe out there. And that's often the framing, that's often the wording used in existential philosophy. You here and the universe out there. Well, actually, you are the universe. You are made up of the same things as the physical universe. And if we think about how the need for meaning evolves in the universe, in us, then we can view humans as meaning making. And where do we look for meaning? Well, I think this is a pretty clear mistake. Those philosophers sometimes moving towards a nihilistic philosophy where more about bleakness, meaninglessness, and despair, but they often frame meaning as if from the position, like what Natalie said with her clients, what position do we take in the universe? Well, I wouldn't take the vacuum of space as the sort of center of that framework or philosophy, but I do understand the darkness that can make any of us feel that sort of void or personal vacuum, as it were, a vacuum of meaning. And you got to remember when existential philosophy was really coming to terms with scientific discoveries post Nietzsche and into Camus and Sartre and de Beauvoir, they were just starting to understand that and describe the vacuum of space. These were new things. So people were reacting emotionally to how they felt about their place in the universe with this information coming into the society at the time. So, are we going to look instead then in the exact parts of the universe where meaning is created? And I describe life as a vibrant island of meaning. And there are beautiful and meaningful acts of kindness displayed by human beings, sometimes in the name of religion, maybe more often in the name of religion. So it's very important how we think about where we look for meaning. And this is what I would have thought. I just don't want to talk on Natalie's behalf, but that's what this community is supposed to be about as well. It's nurturing and cultivating meaning in a shared space. So that would be a good place to look for meaning, more so than the vacuum of space, I would argue. But there is responsibility with this, as I said. If we have the ability to construct meaning, we have to choose better meanings. It's very clear in our modern day that the meanings that are being pursued by certain aspects of our society are not enriching people's lives with meaning. And they're certainly not democratically allowing meaning to be distributed or accessed by everyone equally. Okay, probably should have had a picture of a small dog at this point, because I feel like that was kind of an extended section. The molecular biology revolution. So I've said that we are the universe, and I'm just going to give you the history about how we came to that. Now, the reason many of you may have heard from, Carl Sagan or heard it through other means, but the reason it's kind of not solidified in each of us as a concept that we are the universe is because it happened so gradually over time, starting in the 1700s, to be honest, but really becoming incredibly clear by the 1950s. So for those who aren't molecular biologists or scientists, I've put this hierarchy of life. So you've got atoms and molecules at the smallest, most fundamental area, right at the bottom of the tier. This is where we think that life emerged initially the origins of life from lifeless atoms and molecules, and then up a level you got cells. And actually this was a revolution in itself, understanding that all life on Earth is composed of cells, including yourself. And then you've got groups of cells, tissues, then organs, organ systems, the whole organism, and then groups of organisms. So this might be a counselor, a psychotherapist, and a client. So when we look at that bottom of this pyramid, this is the atoms that were formed in stars. Okay, but what makes it easier to think about this is to take a more primitive example of cells, single-celled organism, although that's not exactly true. These cells display incredible cooperative behaviors too. We'll take a bacterial cell. We'll go right back to the earlier, more primitive form of life, of which we are descendants. And if we zoom right in, and this is a beautiful artwork by the artist David Goodsell, we have what I would describe, and many others do, as the molecular storm, the hustle and bustle and chaotic motion of molecules inside the cell. So yeah, in terms of how this was divulged, scientists started looking at simpler molecules that were not really associated with living things. The first one they really started to get an atomic level detail was table salt. But then they started to look at molecules that came from living things, vitamins and minerals, because they're reasonably tractable and smaller and easier to deal with. But it culminated in the complex molecules of DNA and proteins, being able to see them on an atomic level to know what their shape and structure and their function was. And as I said, happening gradually, it became pretty clear that life wasn't made up of a different form of atoms, a different type of atoms from the rest of the universe, but that life is made up of the same constituent parts. And of course, I probably should have given maybe a little bit more background, but atoms were once thought to be the smallest indivisible thing in the universe, which is essentially what the word means, and it was given by the Greeks probably 2,000 years ago. We now know that atoms themselves are made up of constituent parts, but regardless, these are fundamental particles at the lower levels of existence. And so the inception of this molecular revolution really takes off with the discovery of the structure of DNA. And Rosalind Franklin, who I show on the left, she generated, along with her student, this X-ray diffraction pattern. So this is when they shine the X-rays onto the molecule, they get a pattern that they can then reconstitute into a structure. And a lot of that work, the reconstitution, was done by James Watson and Francis Crick. And so this inherited information is passed on when organisms reproduce. And it's very important for thinking about evolution and things like that. And it's got an incredible structure, almost like a spiral staircase. And the rungs on the ladder in the middle contain the information. And I think it's important to take a moment here. It's still one of the most incredible things that matter in the universe, the atom, in a polymer, which is a long stretch of subunits, but still made up of atoms, that depending upon the sequence of those atoms, you can encode information. It's unbelievable. So the way that it encodes information was a huge project that was undertaken in the 50s and 60s, but ultimately they kind of, in this 20-year period, honed in on all the most important parts of that process. So the DNA is the information. It gets transformed into a different molecule, and ultimately it gives you a protein at the end. And proteins are the things that do stuff, that build cells, that are structural components. They carry out chemistry, they process energy. So they're encoded in the DNA. But yes, in saying all of that, I believe that the next phase of the revolution was a bit of a distortion. The impressive properties of the DNA, which are incredible. As I said, a molecule that can encode information, unbelievable. But I think we took it a little bit too far. So I'm now bringing us to the next phase of the molecular revolution, to what I call the ultimate decentering, genetic reductionism, where we've talked about different ways in which we view our place in the universe. We take ourselves away from the center of the universe with Copernicus. We re-establish ourselves as being part of the tree of life and not separate and, more important than any other living thing. We are not more important than other living things. But then it goes too far, I think, with the following. So this is The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins' 1976 book. This is in my words, which I've written in a more careful and cautious way. And here it is. The idea is that humans and all living organisms are survival machines constructed by DNA for the benefit of the DNA. The mortal body is transient and temporary, but the gene may be passed on to the next generation. In this way, genes are considered immortal, outliving the organism and surpassing it in terms of importance. So this is that DNA molecule that contains all the information. And he's saying that information is king, specifically this inherited genetic information in the form of genes. And so in terms of decentering, this is huge. As I sit here talking to you in this chair, I'm not the most important thing in the chair. The DNA is. Everything about my life is constructed by DNA in order for DNA to propagate itself into the future, an idea that I don't agree with anymore. But let's take Richard Dawkins' own words, which are even more bombastic than what I've just said. Forgive the image that I made myself, but it's not the best. I think it needs a bit of work. So this is how Richard Dawkins placed it. Now they, genes, swarm in huge colonies, safe inside gigantic, lumbering robots sealed off from the outside world, communicating with it by tortuous indirect routes, manipulating it by remote control. They are in you and me. They created us, body and mind, and their preservation is the ultimate rationale for our existence. And at the very start of his book, The God Delusion, we have this re-established again. The ultimate purpose, gene survival, hides behind a more upfront design, which is you and I, and every other living creature, machines of ineffable complexity. So it's pretty clear what his perspective on the nature of life is from what he's saying there. And I've written an article about this, and I did a YouTube video as well, trying to address some of the concerns raised. Probably the most important thing for me to say here is that some people do still very much adhere to Richard Dawkins' view of the nature of life. Some people are in agreement with what I'm saying, that it needs to be abandoned, that we need to talk about things differently. But I have to be honest with you, there are scientists who still believe that this is a reasonable framing for what life is. In short, my problem with it is the following. DNA, the inherited material, is a repository of information. It doesn't do anything. It does not construct cells. It doesn't construct organisms. If you're talking about the constructors, you could say, well, the cell itself builds things. And proteins specifically are the workhorses of the cell. They build things, they form the structures within the cells, and they are importantly, I think I show it on the next slide. Yeah, they are important for making DNA. Richard Dawkins talks about DNA being a self-replicator or even a replicator. It's not. DNA is replicated. Yes, it templates its own replication, but it needs an army of complex protein machinery in order to do so. To read the DNA code, to decide what genes are switched on and to make transcripts, again, proteins. To make proteins, again, you need proteins and another molecule, RNA. So I would not feel comfortable telling a student now that, oh yeah, the cell is constructed by the DNA and it's just to replicate the DNA into another generation. I just wouldn't say that. I don't think it rings true. So, as I said, I think he imbues DNA with characteristics that it doesn't actually have, which are displayed by other biological molecules. And he gave DNA this creative power to construct the organism, implied causal properties or agency, like a puppet master. And he was coming at this from an informational slash evolutionary perspective. So that's why and I'll not talk about why he came to that conclusion. I think it was probably a reasonable exploration at the time, although people have disagreed with it from the beginning, and others do still agree with it today. But I do think it was a reasonable and an exciting and, to be honest, an ingenious idea. But I just don't think it's correct. Some common misunderstandings, though, Dawkins is not saying that DNA, saying that life forms are selfish. He actually has books about altruism and cooperative behaviors. And he's also not saying that DNA actually has conscious properties of selfishness. He's just saying that it's kind of like DNA is only interested in replicating itself into a future generation, and it just makes more and more elaborate survival machines, humans, any other living thing, in order to do so. And hopefully now you're starting to be convinced of why I'm thinking about molecular biology in the concept of existential philosophy. The selfish gene idea turns up in a lot of nihilistic philosophy that's been coming out in recent years. So some examples. I just need to, I can't really see the top of that. I'll say more and more people, I've got like a bar at the top. Natalie, would you be able to read this one out for me, please?
Absolutely. More and more people will start telling themselves, I don't understand what all these neuro experts and consciousness philosophers are talking about, but the upshot seems pretty clear to me. The cat is out of the bag. We are gene copying bio-robots living out here on a lonely planet in a cold and empty physical universe.
I think we can now see pretty clearly the mistakes that are being made here existentially, just in the wording. That's from The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by horror writer Ligotti, and he talks a lot in the book about the Norwegian philosopher who's come back into vogue recently, Zapf. But he's quoting specifically a neuroscientist here, Metzinger. Okay. And then we've got David Benatar from The Human Predicament. When people wonder whether their lives have meaning, they are not likely to be reassured by the observation that they are merely a mechanism for replicating genetic material. And then John Gray from the book Straw Dogs. Science has today an authority that common experience cannot rival. Let us note that Darwin teaches that species are only assemblies of genes interacting at random with each other and their shifting environments. Darwin's discovery was that species are only currents in the drift of genes. So ultimately, what I want to present is a concept of positive materialism. A lot of psychotherapists, existential philosophers have taken not offense. They've challenged mechanistic, materialistic descriptions, particularly of humans as machines. So I'm not actually against reductionism. I think that reductionism is to understand the molecules of life, the evolution of the cosmos, and how life arises and emerges from that. I don't think that's something to be overlooked. But what the type of reductionism that Richard Dawkins did with the selfish gene, genetic reductionism, was to obsess over DNA to the exclusion of so many other things. And yeah, I think I saw it somewhere of Irwin Yalom and Ernesto Spinelli as sort of rejecting reductionism, and in that way that a philosopher or therapists might call phenomenological. And by that, the importance of the human experience. I think we can talk about reductionism in the way I have in this talk and still value the human experience. In fact, we should use our awareness of ourselves as humans to understand those scientific insights. And Emmy van Deurzen says something to that effect on her website in one of her articles and talks about the lack of self-awareness by some of the scientific communicators that we've spoken about. Okay, so in the last part, I want to present a positive framing of materialism. So I have a video. I hope it doesn't come across as obnoxious that it's a video that has me talking in it. I was just going to read this out, but then I actually like the images and video clips which Erin, my partner, took, and the music as well, I think helps to convey the sense that I want to have. So anyway, it's a very short video about positive materialism, and I'm just going to play it just now.
As we ponder our place in the cosmos from a scientific perspective, a convincing illusion dissolves. From our vantage point, it feels as though we are separate observers of the universe, almost as if we were placed here, dropped into existence from somewhere else. Exploring the nature of life on a molecular level reveals that we are composed of the same atoms as the physical universe, atoms forged in the furnaces of stars. You are an intricate, complex arrangement of matter, animated by the flow of energy. You are part of an unbroken chain of descent from the origin of life 4 billion years ago, which is almost a third of the age of the universe. Life on Earth is a candle in the dark, a vibrant island of meaning amidst the vast emptiness of space. Buddhist philosophy describes the concept of dukkha, or suffering, and that the source of this discomfort is when our expectations of reality are misaligned with its true nature. The phenomenon we call life is the most interesting and meaningful process that can exist in the universe, as far as we know.
Okay, so and an extension of that, living things, us, are, yes, made up of the same atoms found throughout the universe. Yes, we are the universe, but, and Ari Pross is an origin of life researcher and chemist. In his book, What is Life, says this really well. Living things are made up of the same dead molecules as non-living ones, but somehow the manner in which those molecules interact in a holistic ensemble results in something very special, us and every other living thing on this planet. So, final thoughts. Life emerges as the universe evolves. And I'm wording that carefully not to create the false distinction between us and the universe out there externally and us separate from it. I argue that life is the most interesting thing that can exist in the universe that we know of. And I've probably not been able to talk about the science as to why I believe that. But if we talk about matter from a physics perspective, then life displays properties. And I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, life is an incredible thing. If it's almost too obvious to even say, but life displays properties as a form of matter that go far beyond anything else that you would see in the absence of life. And it really is, as Adi Pross said, something very special. Also, it's important to say that an optimistic view is equally valid or as equally invalid as a pessimistic outlook. Although, to be honest, as I've been given this talk, I feel more emboldened to say that if your outlook is honed in and focused on the vacuum of space, it probably is verging on just an error. And none of this necessarily resolves the challenges we have in living, which is one way to think of therapy, counseling, psychotherapy. But maybe it offers comfort through a different perspective on life in the universe. That's to say that maybe the cosmos, maybe the place of humanity and life within the universe is not something that should necessarily contribute to the suffering that you experience in your day-to-day life. But of course, again, that's a very personal thing. Okay, so I just need to say that's me finished, but I'm on all these different platforms. There's a link in the description that Natalie sent out in the email, but otherwise, if you search Mall Bio, it should come up somewhere. The written articles that cover what I've talked about today are much longer and much more detailed, if you're wanting to look at that in more detail. And of course, if there's anything, well, there will be many things I've missed. I've had to be selective, but if you think I've missed something that really would enhance or change the way that I'm framing this, please do let me know through one of these channels. If there's a message option, just send me a message, or yeah. Human acknowledgements, and I've realized I made a mistake because my very, very good friend Nasser Ahmad is not on here. I tried to sort of keep this to, because I could acknowledge so many people, but I wanted to keep it to people who have contributed to the philosophy, those conversations, the sense of meaning. So Nasser is very much should be on this list. Sorry, Nasser. I just think I was putting the talk together too fast. Erin Kenny is deliberately positioned at the top. My partner, she's helped me with social media, technical support. She's a psychotherapist. That's why I know about existential psychotherapy through her. Our good friends, Danielle and Emily, who we love so much. And Scott Gallagher, who I've put as my philosophical advisor. But don't have a go at him if I've for any errors. Those errors are mine. John Allen, who's he's also a science writer, so we're kind of working and navigating on this together. Stephen McIntyre for his search engine optimization and technical expertise. My brother Stuart, who's been interested in very similar things, read all those same books as me growing up and has unique perspectives on all of it as well. Thank you, Natalie, for allowing me to contribute to the existential offerings community. And I'm looking forward to, after this, just sitting back and listening for a while.
Chris, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. And if anybody wants to pop their cameras on now that the presentation is finished, and hopefully we have another just under half an hour to have a discussion about this. But Chris, thank you so much. I think what I realize with speaking and hearing from you is that you're the for someone like in my position where these are not a familiar language, not familiar things to be listening to, you do such a fantastic way of sharing it in a way that is easy to access for people who it's not, you're speaking a different language, as it were. So I really thank you, because I know that that is really a big part of the effort that you're putting into this project, making it more accessible for people who haven't gone down the molecular biology route in life. But I think you make such a convincing argument as to why, if to use our science language, make a convincing argument. But it's you really do make a convincing argument, and you do inspire us as to understand how bridging disciplines and speaking to people that are speaking a different language, that have taken their life a direction that you haven't necessarily, is just adds so much value. And from my experience, is there's the things that I can access at the time, and there's the things that come to me after, and that includes, well, rewatching the conversation, but also just reflecting more broadly on that. So I hope that everybody will not only be present here today, but also will take that time to watch the recording and to actually let this sink in all the different ways, because you cover so much. But I feel like I'm now rambling. I'm I'm so
I,
grateful for this.
I
Thank
felt
you.
like I was rambling at times as well, because I did try and cover so much, and I really struggled with the structure of it and stuff. And yeah, I hope, but thank you for your, I do try and do it in, I keep coming back to plain language summaries sort of thing, plain language. I think, and I'm sorry if I'm offending any philosophers here, but I think sometimes language is used to impress rather than convey information. And I really don't want to do that. That's just not, I want to take everyone with me, and I want everyone to be able to say, no, I don't agree with you on that. I don't think that's the case.
So there's some comments in the chat, but I would also welcome anybody to jump in or to raise their hand or to write any questions or reflections that you might have that we can ask Chris about or discuss as a group together. Oh, right in there. Go ahead, Sylvia. Lovely to see you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Natalie, for organizing, and thank you so much, Chris, for sharing. I think it was perfectly structured, by the way. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And as Natalie said, it was really accessible. I really enjoyed it. I'm with you on the positivity as well. I am a geek therapist and I'm interested in philosophy of technology. So I guess my question is going to be hopefully not challenging. It is really just my curiosity. I'd like to tap into your understanding of what you're talking about. Speaking of non-democratic aspects of our existence, and by the way, I'm very new to existentialism, about 2, 3 years into it, and I really enjoy it. I'm also a liberation practitioner, so I'm very interested in decentering and looking at other ways of knowledge and sharing knowledge. So my curiosity is, from your point of view, and thinking about molecular biology revolution, which to me feels very somatic, very embodied, right? How do you feel and what conversations do you see about the currently coming to the surface AI revolution? Because it's been there for quite some time. And I guess I'm more interested in the kind of shifts in the need for meaning making, which,
Mm,
the very kind of more animalist, the very our meaning making in relation to technologies that very much, to me personally, feel just as industrial as Dawkins' perspectives, very mechanic. And
mhm.
yet we're building the relationship with something that's a very new beast. That's something very new to us. So I hope my question makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah,
Actually, the
thank you.
article, The Molecular Revolution in Biology, finishes on a discussion of artificial intelligence, but I go with the author Jamie Metzel, who talks about not just artificial intelligence, but how it intersects with a whole host of new technologies in genetic engineering, medicine, computational things that are distinct from AI. And he says we're wielding godlike powers, and there's nothing in the technologies that ensure that they'll be used in a positive way. But the potential for it to have a positive impact on humanity is beyond anything that we've ever seen as well. In terms of meaning, I think that even as someone who's trying to be a writer, who's interested in music and playing music and singing and things like that, there's a potential for AI to strip, and already is stripping, so much meaning from the pursuits that we enjoy. And that is terrifying, and not just in terms of, some people, if you're George Orwell, I think he says something to the effect of work is so important for a person's meaning. So many jobs are already being now converted into automated AI jobs. Something that, if you've read Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, he devotes a lot of the book. He says this was going to be happening, and he's not the only one. And it looks like it's already happened in the last year or two, where the job opportunities have decreased. But the idea that you could say, write and sing a song in the style of my friend Chris, and write an article on the topic of philosophy, existentialism, and science in the style of Chris, and then instantly have that's terrifying, no? In terms of meaning, because yeah, and Anthony is
Yeah,
coming here. Yeah,
it's so lovely, Chris. And I think offline, I'd love to spend several hours with you, really. I am. I'm a professional scientist and have been for many years. And what I see as the big change is that we're moving from hypothesis-driven science to data-driven science. And
yeah,
the thing about hypothesis-driven science, by and large, it's teleological. So we're moving away, as we move away from that, we're moving away from, if you like, the poetry and the mythology of life towards patterns of data. And the great advance, and that's what really excites me, is that thinking will be completely different when we can look at more than one element at once. So I can only test things in one step, really, a hypothesis. I have an idea, I test the experiment, and I come out of it. And what's going to happen is the absurd will be very fascinating next, because the absurd could be really different than the two ways of thinking, which is rational and, if you like, magical. And I think we're entering into a very different time where science, you will be able to look at so much complexity that it will blow our minds. And that's, for me, I'm so lucky I'm living still in this time where we're going to explode.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and that's something I'm going to try and explore in the future. Will be actually looking at the limits of reductionism and looking at a systems approach and how we can holistically look at systems and networks, the type of problems that require computation that the human brain can't cope with, keeping 6 or 7 things in the mind as it's looking at patterns and looking at things. So I'm going to try and cover that as much as I can. I don't think I'll come to a conclusion about it, but I think you're right that in terms of the things that might emerge from that type of complex investigation of complex data may start to be so alien to our simplistic ways of thinking that they could appear to be almost magical, but with our quotations, as always. Thank you very much. A very interesting, and that's the other thing to say, because you've highlighted a potential positive, and there are potential positives. The combination of AI with medical professionals is going to improve diagnosis and outcomes for patients with things like cancer. It's going to make people live longer.
Which is another interesting thing. But I think just one add to it. I mean, the Hermetic statement, as above is so below, is basically everything from electrons up to God is the same. So it's always been there. I would argue it was the body snatchers in the 16th, 17th century that actually killed the way that we think of life. And as a pathologist, I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that it's true. There were all of these indicative things about the fact that life was material in the same way that other things were, and it comes from medicine, pathology, anatomy, where they make and they knew that bone was a mineral. They knew that urine contained salts, and that's one of the early experiments that could be synthesized independent of a human, a urea. So there were loads of hints, but I think there's a clarity that comes from just looking directly at the thing with an instrument that came in the 50s. But yeah, this idea of vitalism, that life was separate, was probably already not really a strong idea by the time of the molecular revolution. I mean, some people still believe it, but it not in scientific circles, it's not. But this systems approach, this complexity that you would see, may start to describe something someone would want to use words like vitalism for again in the future. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, Nas has a question.
Hey there.
Oh,
I just want to say thanks. Thank you, Chris. It's really nice to hear you talk about so many topics that we've discussed a little bit here and there. And thanks, Natalie, as well. It's a really nice space. Chris, I actually wanted to ask a question related to what Sylvia asked as well about AI meaning. And you know me, so I work in AI. I do research around the topic. One of the things that I've actually wondered for myself is we've talked about so many scientific revolutions that have changed how we see our place in the world, right? We
Yeah.
talked about how that happened with Copernicus and Earth going around the sun, with Darwin, and humans are just like animals. And I sometimes feel like with AI, what we're seeing now is another one of these kinds of turning points where we're having to grapple with the idea that, oh, intelligence isn't the thing also that makes us special. We can maybe make algorithms that can display, at least display as much intelligence,
Yeah.
approximately as we do. Some part of me feels like it's like we keep trying to lean on certain things to get meaning out of them when we can make it
Yeah.
ourselves and we don't have to lean on anything. But it feels like we've been leaning also on the idea that we're smart, and that's why we're.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I'm curious what you think of it. I'm curious what you think of what what we're missing there if we've been leaning on being smart as the reason why we can have a meaningful life.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think that's probably the thing. I agree with you. That's probably the thing that we could have pointed to as the most special that separates us from all of the universe and all of life. You know, you've heard those things, you've probably said them, that the brain is the most complex thing in the universe as far as we know. But what I think, and I'm going to be silly here, I think that human beings doing things will be like vinyl records. It'll be like you know, people will want to see a human sing live without modifications to their voice, and it will be like a rustic sort of return to authentic things. And I think so. I think humans doing stuff will be really important. I think people will demand that they're watching a human talk and not a deep fake generated human with a generated voice with a generated script. Um, it doesn't solve the crisis though. To be surpassed by technology in this way, because human life is still much, we're all vintage. It's our selling point now. That's what we're going to have to say. That was in the chat. Um, Yeah, so life is still much more impressive than our technology can mimic. We can employ certain things in genetic engineering, little specific tools. We don't do anything quite as impressive as life, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we are approaching being able to do all of that. So at the moment, life is more impressive than, life is a better polymer chemist than any human polymer chemist, but the gap is closing.
It's interesting. I have a feeling something like the one gap we won't be able to close is what it feels like to be, as you say, in a room with another human being and to
Yeah.
know that they're having an experience that's similar to us. Like the meeting of two people is something I don't think we're ever. I think that's at least one space that we can't. It's kind of the speaking to the somatic part you talked about, Sylvia. It's like
It would be interesting if we can compute how cells connect with each other, which is a model of what we are. We might be able to do that.
well, I don't think so I hear you on some level maybe, but on another level, the knowledge that we have that the person we're talking to is also a biological organism that experiences a subjective reality. I mean, you can simulate that a computer might have that, but you'll never be sure is it actually experiencing life the way that I do. So there's a subjectivity gap there.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, and maybe it's a silly example, but Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they explored all of that, because at what point, and it gets into to what rights will artificial intelligences need and all of that stuff. But yeah, something about life that's overlooked by a lot of scientists is its historical contingency, that life has this, for you and I, all of us have a 4 billion year history to get to this point. So the complexity compounds in that way. So it will probably always need to be simulated. But again, in 3,000 years' time, what will we, what will be the discussion, and I don't know. It's just mind blowing to think, and we need to be very careful and cautious about it all, for sure. Sorry for forgetting you on the final slide, Nasser. That was a ridiculous mistake. Sorry.
Don't worry about it. I'll get a beer from you sometime.
Andrea, welcome.
Thank you. Fascinating. This is not my natural habitat in terms of subject matter, but I was building on this discussion about AI and the evolution of society. I also wonder whether, well, my question is it meaning, or is it about meaning, or is it about our sensory experience of life and being human and being connected to something bigger that's not related to technology and power and a false reality? It's not really a question, but I think there's something that's going to be lost about our senses and our experience of existing more than meaning. If we don't know or trust what we see and feel, and if it's real, or if we feel it, or if it's us or something bigger, in terms of existence, it's a little bit mind or soul blowing.
Yeah, I hear you. There's like the idea of your pursuit's been done by something else, and then what does that mean for the thing you, but aside from that, like probably even more fundamentally, like you say, not being able to trust your senses, which we already can't, can we? We can't. The internet, the material that we're being shown, we don't know it anymore, if it's real.
In the real world, whatever that is, we can to a certain extent.
To some extent, yeah. I just think about the amount of, and I'm not criticizing anybody at all with this, and I'm not saying I think people should have a right to do whatever they want, but even like the physical modifications that we are making now, we don't know what someone actually would have looked like necessarily if they hadn't been modified by. And the thing is, the modifications are much more convincing and effective than they ever were before, in terms of like things like Botox, plastic surgery. Every celebrity, every single celebrity that you're seeing on your television, but they're now it's democratized, and people might have that. And I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that what we are seeing in the real world is also modified quite a lot too. When you go and see a live musician, the auto tune is included by the person who is contributing the PA system. So you could go and do an open mic with auto tune on, but subtly to the point where you wouldn't know. But when you sing in the bathroom, you might be pretty disappointed to hear what you sing like.
And even in a simple conversation with people, how tuned in are the people to themselves and the moment, and how real is it?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
a broader question. I just wonder
No,
whether
but
the
you're
nature of
totally
existence is being interfered with, possibly because we're over-engineering life. It's not just AI, but ourselves, the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's possible. And I appreciate your insight. I think that takes it potentially to an even more fundamental place. I was actually, have you read The Case Against Reality by Donald Hoffman? He talks about, just the issues with our senses in terms of the fact that it's our eyes, and it's an interpretation of reality and something like that. But it would be interesting to take his framework of that you can never know the true nature of reality directly. It's always indirect, and that it's a constructed image, say, in your brain that's indirect. But within that framework, to think about everything you're saying as well would also be interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia, do you have another question?
I just have a comment to what Andrew, what you were both talking about actually, and leads to my initial question and curiosity. I work as a virtual reality therapist, and something you're talking about I think is incredibly important, technically speaking. Apologies for the language. When we are in virtual realities and so-called grounded realities, our brain cognitively doesn't know the difference. So what's really beautiful therapeutically is the brain doesn't know the difference. Perception doesn't know the difference. If we stand on a plank on the top of a high building in VR, we're sweating. What is the magic of this therapeutic encounter is the meaning making, is the awareness of sitting in the room with the therapist and knowing that we're okay. And I think that's where the power of humanity possibly lies in what you're saying, and acknowledging that we don't know what we see. But we do know what we feel somatically. We do know who we're relating to. And also let's introduce the nuance of different type of backgrounds and diversity and knowledges. We know our story, we know, yes, 7 generations of DNA and how it got activated. But the choices we make in that moment are still ours, right?
Yeah, I think what you're saying, I think it resonates with what Nas was saying as well about there being something different standing with someone. And I think I'm not a therapist, but I know that when they talk about the therapeutic relationship between a counselor, and it's one of the things I learned from the pluralism world, is, that so much of what is beneficial is the strength of that relationship. And the different schools of thought, existentialist or cognitive behavioral therapy or person-centered, often the outcome is determined by the quality of that very personal relationship between two people sitting side by side. And there's something beautiful about that. Yeah. There's a lot to think about. My mind's going very fast trying to think about it all. And yeah. I think we'll always need it. I do think we'll always need that, I hope. Or we'll be, as I said, we'll be like vinyl records. We'll just be like a little, on a Sunday or something, we'll get real humans playing music in a pub somewhere. And that'll be the one place. Maybe we'll all go in this existential offering. Yeah, that's where Natalie would prefer.
I think
Have you got any other question? Oh, sorry, on you go.
I think I would argue that a bit like ancient Greece, we will eventually head towards theatre. Theatre will be our greatest experience because, like in ancient Greece, we will be able to see humanity as a theatrical experience, as opposed to a clinical world where I have slides, terrible slides that I show where people are hooked up on as many machines as they can. They've got sensors on the ground. They've got robot dogs that they're patting, and they have a screen that has got a virtual nurse on it, and it's like tragic. And we're going to, our job is to keep people alive. But if we keep them alive to 105, which is not going to be unusual into the future, we've got potentially a 35-year gap between 70 and 105, where we're going to have to fill it with soulful activity. And I think theatre is going to give that.
Yeah, I can see why it would. And it's true. And it touches upon another thing as well about all of this started historically. It probably starts with, painting and then photographs and then videos and film, and that you can create something, that isn't necessarily real. It's a creation and it's something that is shown to create an effect. I mean, we're just getting extremely good at it. I mean, it didn't start with AI as such. But theatre could be the people are there, and you can see them in front of you.
It feels like we're needing an entire session just to speak about AI, and bizarrely, or maybe that's the point, not bizarrely, that was where our conversation last time ended up. I think we tried to pull
Yeah.
it back to something else so as not to say goodbye on that note. Yeah.
I would say, Natalie, if you wanted to do a session to talk about AI, I would definitely not be the best person for that, but I do know people that would be excellent to do that. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I definitely think you could have some real amazing experts that could talk about that. If you wanted to, I guess it looks like people we're interested in it. We're scared. We're optimistic as well in some ways, but it sounds like your community is asking for it, Natalie.
And whether we like it or not, this is part of our existence now. And so, yeah, I think this is something to consider in the future. Otherwise, I just want to thank everybody so much for taking the time to be listening to this, be interested in this, be curious. And thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for sharing everything that you did and leaving us with so much to think about and so much inspiration. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the platform to do the talk. I really appreciate it. I'll have a look through the chat. But as everyone always says, just contact me, and then I tend to find that people don't. But genuinely, if you have any questions, contact me and feel free to do it. Whatever platform you like, I've made sure I'm on them all, I think.
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
nice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
I really
so much,
appreciate you
everyone.
coming.
Take great care, whatever
Thank
you
you very much.